so glad that I decided not to have any pictures. No one told me I was going to follow the guy who does artwork for... someone should have let me know what I was walking into here. My apologies for the English. You absolutely do not want to hear my 10 years of US public school Spanish. It's bad. But it's so great to be here. I have wanted to have a chance to come to Mexico, and Mexico City and Puebla. So many times I've been invited, but it's a resort in Acapulco, as though that would interest me. That's not why I travel to places, just to be in another resort. I want to be somewhere, a place that has history, a place that is unique, that's different than everywhere else. I did, fortunately, during the pandemic, have the chance to actually visit virtually a couple of times. I got to talk about artificial intelligence and the future of industry for YPO here, well represented, and it was great to actually get to answer direct questions. So often, when I'm asked to come in and talk about artificial intelligence, it's really broad stories. It is Skynet gonna destroy us all? Or will C-3PO steal my daughter's job? Which I understand why we're all concerned. But those are not our current problems. I also had a chance to come in and visit with a women's group and talk about my research using artificial intelligence to look at the impact of representation. We built little bots that crawled across the websites of 60,000 companies looking for the variables that predicted wage gap. The punchline is, it's the number of female faces on the leadership team. More women, guess what? The younger women work harder when they have some reason to believe their hard work will pay off. This is the sort of thing that's probably not what you think of when you think about artificial intelligence, but it's the kind of thing that excites me. To understand what makes us human, just happen to use a machine to do it. I actually got my start long ago. Now, for some of you, I see the gray hairs, maybe not as long ago for you, but for others of you up front here, a little younger, it is so far in the past that we might as well be talking about the Middle Ages. But when I went to university, I flipped a coin, quite literally, to decide whether I would study economics or neuroscience. And it came up heads. So I study brains. And I thought what I would do is stick wires into cats, or use rabies retrovirus to trace out the motor patterns in macaque monkeys. And these are the sorts of things that neuroscientists do. But instead, I took my first and only class ever in programming, and I did very well. I did well in a lot of classes. By the way, that is not the whole story of my life. It is decidedly imperfect. But at this moment, everything came together, and I got a perfect grade in this course. And the professor invited me in and said, hey, would you like to be my teaching assistant next year? And I said, sure. And then he said, and I hope you don't mind, but I've recommended you to work at this place called the Machine Perception Lab. So this is in San Diego, University of California, San Diego, and I knew nothing about machine learning at this point. And I went into this lab, and they were working on a project sponsored by the CIA to do real-time lie detection off of raw face video. So, little morally gray, we might say. In fact, when I talk about this in certain countries in the world, the CIA is not the most stirring funder for this. But try and imagine me. I've never done work like this before. And suddenly, for my honors undergraduate thesis, I built a machine that could tell when people were smiling. something that felt so human. Now, by the way, it is a very different thing to say, is this person happy? Turns out that's a different story for each of us. We each have a language of our face. And for some of us, a smile is happy, and for some of us, a smile is anxious. Some cultures, a smile is inviting, and in other cultures, a smile is tension. But still, just the fact that I could literally write computer code and let it look at faces that armies of undergrads had been enslaved into hand coding up happy and sad and anxious and disgusted, and it could learn from all of those examples. That's pretty much what modern artificial intelligence is. It's a bunch of code that learns statistics from lots of examples. And that was my introduction in the late 90s. And I was hooked. The potential abuses by the CIA wanting to, God knows what they wanted to do with this stuff, notwithstanding, I was so excited about what we could do. I still wanted to study brains, but now I could take the best of what machines could do and the best of what people could do and put them together. In fact, as a graduate student, when I interviewed these very fancy universities all around the world, I told them that I wanted to build cyborgs, and boy, did that not help me get in anywhere. But it's still what I wanted to do. And, you know, as challenging as it is to think about how scary it might be for one particular government or a bunch of spies to use algorithms that can analyze your face and track you, it actually later became a very different sort of experience. Several years later, I was approached by the UN about a project. And I was inspired by the thing they asked me to do. I'm going to tell you what they asked me in just a moment. But in the moment, what it inspired me to do was make the sleaziest, most reprehensible startup idea ever. It was called Sexy Face. And it was a website. And you come to the website, and we'd show you a bunch of random faces. And you'd pick the ones you thought were sexy. And here was our promise when you showed up at the website: for free, we'll find everyone on Facebook you think is sexy. And for $5, we'll find everyone who thinks you're sexy. A lot of people showed up. And they played our terrible, terrible game. And the amazing thing is it genuinely worked. Which is to say, they could select faces that kind of fit a category, and our system could learn that language of faces. It could learn it from their very choices. And yes, if you've got a thing for like a Southeast Asian face with mutton chops and a sense of ennui, even if you couldn't tell me what the hell ennui was, it would find it. It was amazing. I once joked that I'm glad we didn't build these things for people with foot fetishes. But because I said, unfortunately we can't because there's no such database. It turns out I am horrifically wrong about that. There is foot fetish databases out there, and I cannot unsee what I now know. But please believe me when I say I'm not a terrible person. As soon as they played this game a couple of times, we confessed. This is just what we call a Trojan. We're pretending to be one thing, but we're not really. It's actually just a mind-reading game. Come up with any face category, and we'll guess it. And most people actually kept playing, even though we'd lied to them, even though they thought they were about to get, all right, there's some juniors in that room, so I'm trying to keep it clean. Even though they thought they were about to get lucky, they kept playing because it was so amazing, this idea that a machine could figure out what you were thinking about something as human, not just as a face, but what makes a face competent, what makes a face sexy, things that seem like very human qualities. And then our system would confess again. It's actually, this is just a Trojan also. Thank you all so much for playing this game, because by playing the game, we've not only learned about the language of faces, but the language of how we see each other's face. What does make someone competent or sexy or have a sense of ennui? What makes them happy or sad? And why would I care about this if I'm not building a lie detection system for the CIA, if I'm not building the world's most repulsive dating app? I care about this because there's a book. And in this book, there's 1 million photographs. They are all of the orphan refugees in UN camps around the world. Not ever, right then, as we were doing the project. And let's say you were living in Damascus and you hadn't heard from your sister's family in Aleppo in weeks, and you're fearing the worst. And you go all the way to Jordan. You don't get to be a refugee until you're out of the country. You go all the way to Jordan, and you go to a camp, and they give you the book. Literally, they have a book with 1 million photographs in it. And I thought, couldn't we do something better than this? What if you drove to Jordan and they give you an iPad? And on that iPad was a set of faces, 18 randomly selected faces out of that book. And you said, you know what? My niece looks a little bit more like this person and this one. And then the system would iterate through, show more faces, trying to figure out your language for faces. Who is your niece? And what we found is that if she is in a camp anywhere in the world, in about 3 to 5 minutes, you found her. So thank you. I appreciate that. It is very reasonable for us to be fearful of what artificial intelligence can do, either as a threat to our work, as a threat to weapons. One of the new technologies being deployed potentially in Ukraine are autonomous weapons that make their own decisions about which targets to attack. And the US is building those too, and so is China. It's a big field of artificial intelligence. But there is a chance for us to do something which is fundamentally human. To use AI not to replace ourselves or to advance the very edges of our ambitions in the world, but to use artificial intelligence to make us better. To think of AI not as artificial intelligence, but augmented intelligence. Now, I've gone a little off script. I've got about 2 minutes, and the title of this talk was something like, how do we robot-proof ourselves? And yet I told a silly little story about something I'm proud of, but maybe it doesn't feel like it's about that question. Tomorrow there's going to be a whole session on the future of education and new directions in that space. And I'm sure you're going to hear amazing stories about what's possible in that space. But I will tell you, if you want to know what's not robot-proof, learning how to program. DeepMind, the subsidiary of Google, just created a new system called AlphaCode. You don't tell it what to program, you give it a problem, and it writes the code all by itself. What is not robot-proof is knowing how to read a legal contract, looking for loopholes. What's not robot-proof is looking at an X-ray. By the way, it's a very challenging thing to do. Nonetheless, all of these are routine skills. They are things that might be very hard for a human being to learn, but for a jerk like me, it's a reason to build a startup and take that job out of the workforce. Replace it. But that's not what I want to do. In fact, that's not even what makes us, should make us all excited about artificial intelligence. In fact, in a world in which the routine, the thing that makes us all sort of boringly the same, is now just a commodity that you could buy from any vendor. It is, in fact, what makes us different that makes us valuable. I don't mean that in a sort of fluffy philosophical sense. I mean it when I go in and I model in deep, complex economic models what happens when AI, cognitive automation, enters the workforce. It is our ability to say something truly unique and different that continues to provide our value. Knowing how to code, knowing how to do AI, a little bit of math, all of these are powerful tools, but they're just tools. AI is just a tool. It's the craftsman that actually does the work. Hammers don't build houses, we do. So you think about what is this future in which these new technologies are potentially changing everything. I want to propose that that future is fundamentally human. And I'm over time, so let me close with this. When I bring someone into my lab, so nowadays I have the best job in the whole world. People bring me incredibly challenging problems. Dr. Ming, my son can't enter REM sleep. Please save his life. Dr. Ming, my daughter has 500 seizures a day. Please save her life. Our company, we know we have bias in our hiring. Please help us identify where it's coming from. Our country doesn't know what to do about its education policy. Please help. And if I think my team and I can make a meaningful difference, I pay for everything. And if we actually come up with a solution, we just give it away. It is the worst startup idea of all time. Endless demand, no revenue. I am clearly not the world's greatest businesswoman, but my life has been wonderfully good to me. This is what I want to do for the rest of it. Here is the job interview to work in my lab. Pitch me a mad science project. What is the thing you believe so deeply that must exist in this world that you would sacrifice everything for it? What is something you would do even if no one ever knew that you were the one that brought it into the world? And instead of poking holes in it, we then spend the next hour together figuring out how to make it work. And if I think we had a better idea together than I would have had by myself, you got the job. That's it. Your value to the world is what makes you unique. That you can bring that in and change the idea. Yes, of course, I want people that know fancy advanced math and programming. All of those are great tools, and I know I'm supposed to shut up, but it is our humanity that is truly the thing that makes us robot-proof. And when we lose sight of that, and we think we need to learn all of these routine skills, and we need to build an education system around a list of skills on a resume, let me tell you, that is not the future that you are hoping for, not for you or your companies or your kids. In fact, I bet all of you have amazing lives already. So let me ask you, I'm going to give you an assignment. Go out in the world and do the following. I've worked out, in my research, I've accumulated about 9.7 trillion data points. And they all say the same thing that I'm going to ask you to do now. If you want an amazing life, you have to give it to someone else. Muchas gracias.